What's good, kings and queens? I'm Dame. Welcome to the Melanin Monday Movement. Alright, now let me start this off by defining white privilege. White privilege is defined as the inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in society, characterized by racial inequality and injustice. That being said, white privilege does not equal racism. They don't go hand in hand, but you can have both, or you could have only white privilege and not be racist. It doesn't matter. The fact is that you get certain rights that other races do not get because you are white. All right, let me start off with a quick history lesson. In 1776, only white men aged 21 and older who owned land were able to vote. So no minorities were allowed to vote, 1776. In 1868, the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution grants full citizenship rights, including voting rights, to all men born or naturalized in the United States. So almost 100 years later, we could finally have full citizen rights to vote. In 1870, the 15th Amendment eliminates racial barriers to voting. However, many states continue practicing voter discrimination. Poll taxes, literacy tests, fraud, and intimidation still prevent many from voting. Native Americans are still denied the right to vote. That's over 100 years later, after white people could already vote. In 1910, Washington voters amend the state constitution, allowing women to vote and run for office. Mind you, that's 140 almost years later. After white people can vote, women can run for office and vote. In 1920, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution is ratified, giving women the right to vote nationwide. In 1923, Washington state voters passed Initiative 40 appealing the poll tax. Poll taxes are used in many states as a way to discriminate against certain voters. In 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act grants Native American citizenship and voting rights. 150 years after white people can vote, Native Americans, the people that were here first, had citizenship and voting rights. That's white privilege at its finest right there. All right, now starts the civil rights movement from 1954 to 1968. If you don't know what civil rights are, they are the rights of citizens to political and social freedom and equality. Just freedom and equality. Just the same rights that every other citizen that is white has already since 1776. In 1964, the Federal Civil Rights Act is passed to ensure that all men and women aged 21 and older, regardless of race, religion, or education, have the right to vote. The 24th Amendment to the Constitution is ratified, eliminating poll taxes nationwide, which, if you remember, that was a way to discriminate against certain voters. In 1975, the Federal Voting Rights Act is renewed, permanently banning literacy tests nationwide. Section 203 is added, requiring translated voting material in areas with large numbers of citizens with limited English skills. So places like New Mexico, where there was a majority of Mexican citizens that couldn't vote because they couldn't even read the ballot, are now able to vote because the voting materials have been translated into Spanish and other languages that were predominantly spoken in that area. And then fast forward to 2000, the U.S. Census reveals that Washington's non-English speaking population has grown large enough that some counties must translate voting materials in compliance with the 1975 Voting Rights Act. So 224 years later, non-English speaking Americans are finally able to vote and have material that they can actually read that is written in their native tongue, so they can vote for policies that will affect them, their children, and their future. Now getting into what white privilege is. So my first point in this is that I can speak English without being told I'm talking white. If you've never experienced that, where people are like, you're talking white or you act white or anything like that, it's because society views white as being the standard for literacy, for sounding educated, for being smart in any way, or being professional. So a lot of times if I use proper English, then I'm considered as acting white. On the flip side of that, if white people use terms that are slang or improper English, it's them talking black, as in black people are less educated, so we can't use proper English. So white people can talk black by sounding less educated, which goes to show that that white is the privilege, that being white means being educated or being better than. The next point is I can arrange the company of people of my race most of the time. That means I can gather with people majority of my race. This is to include that I can be in a college classroom and see multiple people that are black. It doesn't seem like it should be uncommon, but it really is. When you can go to a place and you can see people like you, that is a part of privilege. When I first moved to Kansas, I saw almost nobody that was black. It took a very long time to see a large population of black people, and even then it wasn't large enough. That's white privilege. So the next point is I can turn on the TV or open the newspaper and see people of my race widely represented in a positive light. So I can open a newspaper and I can see positive articles about black people. I can watch TV and see minorities in lead roles, or that the cast is majority black, like something like a Black Panther or Dear White People, where the majority of the main cast are black people. If you don't see that, then you are probably like me. And if you do see that, you probably have white privilege. It's not saying that it's a bad thing that the majority of your roles are of people like you that are white, but ours are not. We are not strongly represented in media, in a positive light especially. The next point is I can be sure that my children will be given curricular material that testifies to the existence of their race, meaning that the history books and other learning material in school is going to represent the black community well, and how we established our communities, our education system, how we fought for our rights, and not just the slavery aspects and the lashings we received and the protests and the beatings we've endured and dogs being sicked on us and Rosa Parks and Malcolm X. And no, there are a lot more people in history of the black community who have done so many great things for the world and America especially. And we're just not represented, and our material doesn't reflect all of the positive things that we've done for society as a whole. But if your race is represented, you have white privilege. And I guarantee that Native Americans, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans are not strongly represented in any literature. The next point is whether I use checks, credit cards, cash, I can count that my skin color will not work against the appearance of my financial responsibility. That is huge. Just because I have a nice car or I live in a nice neighborhood or I have these fancy things that, poor people wouldn't necessarily have, it doesn't mean that I'm a drug dealer, that I'm doing fraud, that I'm doing any type of scams, that I was handed this down, that some white person had to give it to me, or it had to be a gift, or it doesn't matter. The fact is that I could afford my stuff, and just because I'm black, you shouldn't think otherwise. And if you haven't experienced that, you have white privilege. Because people with white privilege don't get questioned very often on how or why they can afford the things they have, or how they can have X amount of children and still provide for all of them. The next point is I can worry about racism without being seen as self-interested or self-seeking. This is huge, especially now with the Black Lives Matter being even bigger than it ever has been. If I talk about racism, they think it's me only caring about black people, that only Black Lives Matter. No, all we're saying is that Black Lives Matter too. Black Lives matter just as much as any other life. And that's what we're saying. And right now, our lives aren't being shown that they matter. By police, by society, by legislation, by all the systems in place, there are a lot of examples of us not mattering to society as a whole. So when I mention racism, it's not just me caring about only black people. It's that We are the ones suffering right now at one of the most alarming rates and being killed at one of the most alarming rates unjustly. And that is why Black Lives Matter. That's why Black lives have to matter more right now than anything else. Because we didn't matter for so damn long. And it's not that I'm self-interested. It's just that I'm trying to preserve the life that you, in your Constitution and other pieces of documentation, say matter. I'm trying to protect that. I'm trying to protect my son. I'm trying to take my son to school without fear of him being shot. It's not just self-interest. It's that it's preservation of life. And my life matters just as much as white life. If you don't have to worry about talking about racism and feeling self-interested, you have white privilege. The next point is, I can be late to a meeting without the lateness reflecting on my race. And we've all heard this 1,000 times, that we're on colored people time. We say it all the time. We show up to a barbecue 2 hours late because we know the food wasn't getting ready until noon when they told us to be here, But just because I'm Black doesn't mean I have to be late. I'm usually early, and that's just something that was instilled to me from my mom and then reinforced when I was in the military and everything like that. But I'm usually 10, 15 minutes earlier to any event. And I'll smoke a cigarette and I'll wait there until stuff gets popping. But just because I'm Black doesn't mean I'm going to be late. It doesn't mean that I'm going to miss a meeting or be untimely because of my race. And if you don't have to worry about people assuming you're going to be late because you're Black, then you have white privilege. It's just that simple. And my last point is, I can be pretty sure that if I ask to talk with the person in charge, I'll be facing a person of my own race. And it's not that only white people get hired as managers or, supervisors or anything like that. It's just the fact that we aren't represented well in society, and oftentimes we are not put in positions of leadership. And we are the minority, so I do understand that there are more white people than there may be Black people. And maybe it might be a family-owned business, and, the grandson is the supervisor, and whatever the case may be. But I can walk into 100 businesses and ask to speak to the person in charge or speak to the manager, and I guarantee 9 times out of 10, it'll be a white person. And I'm not saying the white person didn't qualify for the job or wasn't the best candidate or anything like that. I'm just saying that when I go to speak to somebody in charge, it's probably not going to be someone that looks like me. And that's white privilege. It's not saying that you're better than us necessarily. It's not saying that you're worse. It's not saying that you have any advantage that we don't have or didn't have any. We couldn't take any career path that you chose to get you in that position. But it's just, when I walk into Walmart and I ask to speak to the manager, it's probably going to be a white male or female. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a white male, because out of all the people that have privilege, it's those the most. And if no one told you today, I love you. Also, this unapologetically Black shirt I got from MelaninIsLife.com. I'll have the link in the description below.